Welcome back. In this video, we're going to build a story writer application in Ruby on Rails using Anthropic's Claude AI to plan the story and write the chapters for us. You can see an example of the application here, where we start with some keywords and the number of chapters to write, then let Claude write the story overview and chapter list, followed by each of the chapters in turn until we have the full story saved in the database and rendered in the browser. Right, let's dig in. First, we'll create a new Rails app. I'll specify the version of Rails here, so you can follow these exact steps and be sure that it works. Once that's done, we'll cd into the Story Writer folder and we'll open the project in our IDE. Now we'll open up the gem file and add some gems that we'll need in this project. Namely, Claude Ruby gem, AI agent gem, .env Rails, and HTT party. We'll tidy up the gem file while we're here. Once that's saved, we can run bundle install and Rails db create. Now we'll generate a story model to hold our story data. We'll keep it simple, with just a title, an outline, and an array of chapters which we'll store in the database as a JSON-B field. We'll jump into the Create Stories migration and add a couple of defaults. Then we can run Rails db migrate to create the stories table. Now we'll generate the stories controller and add some standard methods to it. A little bit unconventionally, we're going to redirect the show action to edit if there aren't any chapters yet. The idea here is that we'll reserve the show action for displaying the finished story later. We'll need to add stories resource to our roots file too, and a simple index view. Now let's start the server and see if the basic app loads in the browser. Okay, it's time to work on the story model to add some more functionality there. We'll add a create from outline class method, which we can call to create a new story instance using an outline hash of the story. When we test that in the console, we'll create a story outline hash like this. Then we can call story.create from outline story outline. And that will create a new instance of story for us. But of course we want Claude to write the story outline for us. So let's create a story LLM service model that will interact with Claude. We'll start with the basic structure, where we initialize the service with a story, and we have a method to get a Claude agent, and a couple of helper methods. For this demo, I'm going to use the Claude cheapest model, but for production, you'll probably want to use Claude smartest instead, which is currently set to Claude 3.5 Sonnet at the time of recording this video. In the agent method, we use AI agent gem configured with Claude Ruby to get a new Claude client. Now we need to write a prompt that we can pass to Claude to get back a story outline. This could be something as simple as, I want to write a story about some topic and need you to generate an outline of the story for me. But we'll go for something a bit more sophisticated in order to get back a better response. And to help us generate ideas, we'll actually pass in an array of words or descriptions which Claude can use as inspiration for the story. So we're going to use something like this. I have X descriptions of objects, ideas, or themes. Your task is to read the descriptions and to use them as inspiration to draft a short story outline that's suitable for a general audience, to suggest a list of X chapters for the story, and to provide a one-sentence synopsis of what to expect in each chapter. The short story should be fun and witty. Of course, you can customize that for your own use case, but that does a pretty good job generating a coherent story overview for our example application. We're going to ask for the result to be returned as JSON so we can better map it into our story model, something like this. Return your result as valid JSON, which will later be parsed by rubyjson.parse method with the following top-level keys only: title, outline, chapters, and for each chapter use the following keys: chapter title and synopsis. Each field should contain only its information, with no preamble or postamble. If any field contains double quotes, then they must be escaped. Then we'll add the list of descriptions and put the prompt into a messages format that will work with the AI agent gem and Anthropic API. We'll also add a little bit of validation here to ensure we're not sending nonsense to Claude. Note that we've packaged the system role into the same array as the user role. That's not how Anthropic API expects the system message, but it's a format that's consistent with some other LLM APIs. But AI agent gem will handle the mappings for us into the format that Anthropic API expects. We'll also add a utility class that will hold some general helper methods for us. For now, we'll just add a couple of methods to it. Replace square brackets and squish array. And we'll include that into our Story LLM service, along with action view text helper, which will also come in handy. Now, before we can test that method in the console to see the full prompt that's generated, we'll need to configure AI agent gem and add the Anthropic API key into the .env file. If you're trying this yourself, then you'll first need to obtain your own API key from Anthropic. Watch the first video in this Claude with Ruby series to see how to do that. I've added a link to that in the description below. Then to configure AI agent gem, you'll also need to add an AI agent initializer and simply require AI agent/Claude. Now, if we restart our console, we can test the API call to Claude. We get the Story LLM service. then pass our keywords through to the new Get Story Outline from Key Elements prompt. And we can see in this example that we get a nice story outline for a short story about a courier driver and a friendly puppy dog. We'll create a method in our Story LLM service to do that same API call. Let's call it Generate the Story Outline, and we'll pass in the array of key elements and an integer for the number of chapters that the story will contain. We'll also add a pre-parse JSON method to our utility methods to correct for some JSON errors that Claude sometimes gives us. I won't go through the detail of this file, but in summary, it attempts to fix invalid JSON that's sometimes caused by embedded quotes within the JSON response from Claude. Now we can test that out in the console. Get a new story, LLM service. Then call Generate Story Outline, passing in the keywords, array, and number of chapters. And you can see we have a result. We could create a new story object based on that outline by calling story.create from outline and passing in the story outline. We'll update our stories controller create method to use Claude to generate the story outline. And we'll update the new view and then we'll add some JavaScript to allow us to add or remove key elements from our story outline form. I'm just going to copy and paste this over because it's a bit long to explain. Then we'll need to pin story.js in our import map. And import it in application.js. Now if we reload the application in our web browser, we can go to the New Story page, add some key elements, choose the number of chapters, and create a new story outline. Right. Now it's time to get on to writing the actual story itself. We could ask Claude to just write the whole story in one go, but that, in 2024 at least, would end up in a very short story and with not great results. That problem isn't unique to Claude. Other large language models have the same problem. So instead, we need to break the writing up into chunks. And for our example, that means doing it one chapter at a time. That will work for us as a short story writer. But if you wanted to write a novel, then you'd also need to break each chapter into multiple chunks. On with the code. First, let's create a chapter model. We're going to store chapters as JSON data within the story model, but we want a separate chapter model for validation purposes. Then we'll add more methods to story. We'll define chapters and chapters equals methods. Find first nil chapter, find chapter by number, and formatted chapter titles methods. And also a private chapters format method which we'll use as a validation. And we'll add a couple of scopes to make it easy to find the stories that we're either in the process of writing or that we've already finished. We'll add a method to update chapters as we progressively write them. While we're at it, we'll also update the create from outline method. Include utility methods into story, and create a case conversion concern that will help us transform keys between Ruby format and JavaScript format. Then let's round this off by adding some more utility methods that we'll use later. I'm just going to copy them in here. Now we'll get Claude to write a new chapter for us. We'll create a new method called getWriteChapterPrompt on Story LLM service to generate the prompt we'll need. You can customize this as you see fit, but for now this will do the trick. You are in the process of writing a short story called Story Title, which has the following general outline, story outline, and the following list of chapters, story.formatted chapter titles. Your current task is to write chapter, chapter number, chapter title, consistent with the outline and other chapters of the story, and in approximately target chapter length words. Then we'll add the standard prompt to request that the result be returned as JSON. On Story LLM service, we'll create a write chapter method, which we'll call getWriteChapterPrompt, and send the prompt on to Claude. And we'll add a version of that actually calls the story update chapter method 2. We'll also add a method that finds the first unwritten chapter and writes that specific chapter. Our earlier story example didn't have the chapter data set up right, since we hadn't defined chapters back then. We can either create a new story for testing or fix the old one like this. Just loop through the chapter's data and set the chapter number to the index +1. Now we can test our new methods to write chapters for that story. Service equals story, LLM service dot new story. Chapter number, comma, chapter JSON equals service dot write next chapter, word count. Story dot update chapter, chapter number, comma, chapter JSON. We want to be able to do this through the application front end, so let's add a controller method called write next chapter. And we'll need to add it to the list of actions that we need to call the set story before action on. We'll also update the edit view and chapter partial. I'm just going to copy the examples across for these files. If it's a long story, then we might not want to click the Write Next Chapter button every time. It would be good to have a single button to loop through all remaining chapters and finish the story. We'll add that now, but it's important to note a couple of things. 1. Long-running tasks should be run in the background, rather than leaving the user just hanging around waiting for the page to finish loading. And 2, if you hit the Anthropic API quickly many times, then there's an increased chance of getting an error response due to rate limiting. These are things you'd need to handle in a production version, but we can just skip them for this example. Now, add a new controller method to finish story. And add it to the set story before action. This method will literally just loop through all the unfinished chapters and call service.write next chapter on them. Then we'll add a finish story button into the edit view. And now we can just click a button to finish the story. Now is a good time to fix up our controller index method and to add a layout for viewing the story. We'll use a custom font here, and we'll also provision for a header banner, which will be the topic of the next video after this. While we're at it, we'll add a flash message layout. And update the application.html.rb file to render flash messages correctly. We'll also add a small JavaScript file to allow us to close flash messages. And we'll need to add that to our import map. Now it's time to add some style sheets to tidy things up a bit. I'm just going to copy this over because the detail isn't important for this video. Then we'll update our show view to loop through all of the chapters and output the chapter details into p tags. So there we have it, a basic AI story writer app using Claude. It's recommended to use this as a draft story writer only, not to fully automate the writing and publishing of stories without human oversight, because LLMs do make errors on occasions, even with good prompts. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, then please do so now. Be sure to join me in the next video, where I'll show you how to add some AI-generated images to your story. For now, it's goodbye. See you next time.